There's a basket by my front door. Woven bamboo, a little frayed on one handle, nothing you'd look at twice in any market. But every evening at 6 o'clock, every phone in my house goes into that basket. My son's tablet, my husband's phone, and mine, especially mine. And here's the part that makes other parents stop me mid-sentence when it comes up. My son has never once argued about it. Not a negotiation, not a meltdown, not a single bargain for 5 more minutes in the years we've been doing this. If your house has a nightly war over screens, and I know that for many of you it does because this is the fight of our entire generation of parents, then stay with me because I'm going to show you exactly why that war doesn't exist in my house. And I promise you, it has almost nothing to do with the basket. Let me start by describing the battle where you live because I've heard it described to me so many times by so many exhausted people that I could recite it in my sleep. You tell your child it's time to stop. Your child doesn't respond or genuinely doesn't hear you, which is its own kind of information. You say it again, louder. They say 5 more minutes. You point out that they said 5 more minutes 10 minutes ago. Your voice climbs a step. Their voice climbs too. Maybe the tablet gets handed over with a scowl that could strip paint. Maybe it gets taken from small, furious hands, and either way, both of you walk away from that exchange slightly damaged. And you get to run the whole thing again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until they leave home. And afterward, in the quiet, comes the guilt that is specific to parenting in this decade. I know too much screen time isn't good for him, but taking it away makes me the villain in my own house, and I am too tired to fight this 3 times a day for the next 10 years. If that's you, hear this first before anything else. You are not failing. You are one exhausted person with one tired voice, standing against the most sophisticated attention capture machinery ever built by human beings, systems designed by brilliant, well-paid people whose entire professional purpose is to make sure your child does not stop. That is not a fair fight. It was never designed to be a fair fight. So what I want to give you today is not a better strategy for fighting it. It's a way to stop fighting it entirely. The way my family does, the way a lot of Chinese families do, built on one single idea that sounds so simple you might be tempted to dismiss it. So let me say it carefully. In my house, a screen is not a right. It is not a treat, not a reward, not a punishment, and not a babysitter. A screen is a tool with a job. And when the job is finished, the tool goes back where tools live. The same as a hammer, the same as a kitchen knife, the same as every other powerful instrument a child slowly earns the right to use. I want to unpack that sentence because the whole system lives inside it. And if you understand the sentence, you could rebuild the system yourself without me. Think about how a hammer exists in your household. Nobody in your family has a relationship with the hammer. Nobody sneaks the hammer into bed. Nobody negotiates for 5 more minutes of hammer. Nobody has ever cried at the dinner table because the hammer was put away. Why not? Not because the hammer is boring, so a hammer is genuinely interesting to a child, ask any 4-year-old. It's because the hammer has 3 things: a defined purpose, a clear ending to its use, and a place it lives when it isn't being used. Purpose, boundaries, and a home. Now hold that up against the screen in a typical Western household and watch all 3 disappear. The screen has no defined purpose. It's for everything. It's for learning and for boredom and for reward and for punishment and for keeping the peace in the car and for buying yourself 20 minutes to cook dinner. It has no clear ending because there's always another video, always another level, and this is not an accident, but the entire design philosophy. Rooms full of engineers have worked to ensure there is no natural stopping point anywhere in the experience. And it has no home. It travels. Bedroom to sofa, to dinner table, to bathroom to bed. A device without an address, capable of appearing anywhere at any moment. Purpose, boundaries, home. Remove all 3, and of course you have a war on your hands. You are no longer managing a tool. You are trying to negotiate with the weather. So here is what we actually do, and I'll give you the whole architecture, because the basket you've heard about is only the visible 10% of it. It starts with purpose. In my house, screens exist to do specific jobs, and every person in the family knows what those jobs are. My son uses his tablet for school assignments and for his language practice. On Friday nights, the 3 of us watch a film together. 1 screen, 1 sofa, everybody in the same room. On Sundays, he video calls his grandmother and shows her whatever he's built or drawn that week, and she pretends she can see it perfectly, which she cannot, because she holds the phone at the precise angle required to photograph her own ceiling. Those are jobs. Learning is a job. Connecting with family across distance is a job. Sharing a story together is a job. What is not a job? What has no job at all? is the infinite scroll, the aimless drift that begins with one video and ends 90 minutes later with a child who is somehow simultaneously overstimulated and bored, wired and exhausted, having consumed an enormous amount and received almost nothing. We do not ban entertainment in this house. Friday night is entertainment, and it's sacred. What we've eliminated is aimlessness. So the question in my kitchen is never how many minutes. It's a different question entirely. What is the screen doing for you right now? And if there's no answer to that question, then there's no reason for the screen to be on. Minutes were always the wrong unit of measurement anyway. Nobody has ever asked how many minutes a day their child should use a pencil. The answer depends entirely on what they're doing with it. Then come the boundaries, and this is where 6 o'clock lives. At 6 in the evening, screens are finished for the day. For everyone, not just the child, and crucially, not as a punishment, as a rhythm. The sun goes down every evening, and no one experiences the sunset as a disciplinary measure. It's simply what time does. That's the register we aim for. The evening belongs to other things, dinner, homework at the table while I do my own quiet work beside him, the general unhurried business of a family occupying the same rooms at the same time. And the basket by the door is the physical form of that boundary, a home for the tools once their working day is done. That matters far more than it sounds like it should. And I want to slow down here because this is the mechanical heart of the whole thing. A rule that exists only in words has to be respoken, re-argued, and reinforced every single day by you. Personally, forever, you are the rule. Which means every evening you have to become the enforcer, and your child has to experience you as the obstacle between them and the thing they want. That dynamic is exhausting for you and corrosive for the relationship, and it's why so many parents quietly give up. But a rule that lives inside an object enforces itself. Nobody in my house announces 6 o'clock. The basket is simply there by the door where it always is. The phones go in. The basket does not negotiate. The basket does not have moods or bad days or headache. The basket cannot be worn down by whining, cannot be caught in an inconsistency, cannot be argued into an exception because tonight is special. And this is the part I need you to really hear. The basket does not have a phone of its own. Which brings me to the piece of the system that actually makes it work, and it is the piece most parents don't want to hear. So let me deliver it the way my own mother would have, plainly and with soup afterward. The reason my son does not argue about the basket is that my phone is in it too, every night. No exceptions that aren't announced out loud and explained. And I want to be honest with you here, because this channel doesn't do fairy tales. This was by far the hardest part for me. Not for him, for me. During the first weeks of the basket, years ago now, I discovered exactly how many times per evening my hand drifted toward a phone that wasn't there, to check nothing, for no reason, a pure reflex, like a tongue returning again and again to the space where a tooth used to be. I was not proud of what I learned about myself in those 2 weeks. I had thought of myself as a person who used a phone. It turned out I was a person who was used by one. But here's what my son watched during that period. He watched an adult find something difficult and do it anyway. Of course it's hard. You know my mother's philosophy if you've been here before. And that, more than any rule I could have written or lecture I could have delivered, is why there has never been a war in my house. Children do not experience rules as fair or unfair based on the content of the rule. They experience them based on who the rule applies to. This is the thing I most want you to take away, so let me put it as sharply as I can. A screen limit that applies only to the child is not a household rhythm. It's a verdict handed down by a judge who is, at the very moment of sentencing, glancing at her email. Every child on earth can see that. They may not have the vocabulary to name it. They may not be able to explain to you why the rule feels unjust, but they can smell the hypocrisy from 100 meters away. And everything in them correctly rises up against it. And they're right to. The most common reason screen rules fail in Western homes is not that children are addicted, though they may be. It's that the rules are laws for the peasants and suggestions for the king. In my house, there is no king. At 6 o'clock, we are all simply people whose tools have finished working. My son has never argued with the basket for the same reason nobody argues with the sunset. It comes for everyone. Now let me tell you what actually happened when we started, because I don't want you walking away with the impression that this was painless or that my family is constructed from calmer materials than yours. It is not. The first 3 days were fine. Novelty will carry you 3 days. It always does. On the 4th day, my son discovered that 6 o'clock was real, And we had the protest. Not a tantrum exactly. A formal objection, lodged loudly with the full moral force of a person who has just been informed that the sun will now be setting on a nightly basis. And here's what we did, and more importantly, what we didn't do. We didn't argue back, because the rule doesn't argue. The rule simply is, the way dinner is, the way bedtime is. The moment you start defending a boundary with reasons, you've told your child the boundary is a position in a debate, and debates can be won. We stayed warm and we stayed boring. Yes, it's 6. Yes, the tablet's done. Yes, I know. Come help me with the dumplings. We also didn't extend the deadline, not once, not even by 10 minutes to soften the landing. This is where most families lose it. And I say that with enormous sympathy because the impulse to soften is the impulse of a loving parent. But a boundary that moves under pressure isn't a boundary, it's an opening bid. And children are the finest negotiators on this earth. The instant they learn that the wall has a door in it, every subsequent evening becomes a search for the door. Whereas a wall that has never once moved stops being a wall in their minds at all and becomes something much more useful. A fact. Weather, furniture, the shape of the world. But here's the piece I would underline 3 times for every exhausted parent watching, because it's the part that gets skipped and it's the part that matters most. The boundary was firm, but the alternative was warm. Think about what we're actually asking of a child at 6 o'clock. We're asking them to surrender the single most stimulating object in human history, and in many homes, to receive nothing in return except an instruction to go be bored somewhere quietly. Of course they fight that. I would fight that. That's not a bad deal. It's an insulting one. So we didn't take the screen away. We traded it. We swapped the screen for the table. My son fills dumplings. He is, I will put this diplomatically, an expressive dumpling filler. His creations look like small accident victims. And when his grandmother visits, she eats his first always and declares them the best ones on the plate, and does not explain why, and he pretends not to notice. And if you've watched this channel before, you know precisely what is being said in that exchange without a single word being spoken. He also sets the table badly. He tells us about the political situation among the boys in his class, which is more complex than most governments. He does his homework beside me while I do my own quiet work. My mother's table rebuilt in a different city in a different century for a different child. By the second week, 6 o'clock was simply a fact of our house. By the second month, and I remember the evening this happened, I remember exactly where I was standing, he put his tablet into the basket at 5:40 because he was finished with it, and walked away without being asked, without ceremony, without any awareness that he had done something remarkable. The war we never fought was over. Now, my husband's part in this deserves its own section, because in most of the households I talk to, this is where the whole structure collapses and nobody wants to say so out loud. It is very common for one parent to build a system and the other parent to be, let's say, a permeable membrane. And a screen rule with one leaky adult is not a screen rule. It's a source of resentment between two people who are both, separately, doing their best. My husband is a quiet man. He works long hours, and for years, his phone was effectively an extension of his hand, the way it is for anyone whose work follows them home. When I first proposed the basket, he didn't argue with the principle. He argued, reasonably, with the practicality, what if something urgent comes in? And that's the real question, isn't it? Not whether the rule is good, but whether the world will permit it. So we did something I'd recommend to any couple attempting this. We didn't make him promise perfection. We made an exception, out loud, with a shape. If he's expecting something genuinely time-sensitive, he says so at dinner. Just a sentence, I'm waiting on a call tonight. And the phone stays with him face down, and nobody thinks anything of it. That's it. That's the whole accommodation. And here's why it works. The exception is announced, which means it stays an exception. It doesn't erode the rule, it demonstrates the rule, because everyone can see that a departure requires a reason spoken aloud. Compare that to the silent exception, the parent who just quietly keeps their phone because they're the adult and adults are different. That version teaches the whole household that the rule is decoration. Announced exceptions strengthen a system. Silent ones dissolve it. And I'll tell you what happened to my husband over the first months, which I did not predict and which he has never quite admitted in words because that would not be his style. He got quieter in a good way. He started arriving at dinner already present rather than arriving physically and joining us mentally somewhere around dessert. My son now has a father who looks at him while he talks. That's not a small thing. That's possibly the largest thing in this entire video, and it came free with a bamboo basket. Here's what else changed, and this is where I stopped thinking of the basket as a screen rule and started understanding it as something considerably larger. Dinner got longer. Nobody made a rule about longer dinners. There was simply nothing pulling anyone away from the table, so the table kept us. We'd finish eating and just remain. 20 minutes, 40 minutes, talking about nothing in particular. My son talks more at dinner now, and I don't mean he answers more questions, I mean he initiates. He arrives with things. A grievance about a teacher, an idea for a machine he wants to build that violates several laws of physics, a joke he's been carrying around all day like a coin in his pocket, waiting for the moment to spend it. My mother could read my entire week in how I ate. I now get to read my son's entire day in what he says between 6 and 8, and none of it, not one word of it, would reach me if there were a screen glowing under the table. That's what a phone at dinner actually costs, not manners, information, the daily download of a child's inner life, which arrives in fragments unpredictably, and only when there's silence for it to arrive into. And the morning's changed, which I never expected. Because the phones sleep in the basket by the door, not on our nightstands, nobody in my house begins their day flat on their back, thumb moving, downloading the world's catastrophes before their feet have touched the floor. My son wakes up and is simply here in his own life from the first minute of it. So am I. It turns out the 6 o'clock rule was never really about evenings at all. It was about deciding as a family which hours of the day belonged to us, and then defending them with a basket the way earlier generations defended them with a doorstep and a dinner bell. Now I want to go one layer deeper, because there's a philosophical difference underneath all of this that I think explains why the Chinese framing works where the Western framing struggles, and it isn't about discipline at all. In much of Western parenting discourse, screen time is discussed as a quantity to be rationed. 2 hours, 1 hour, none before age 3. It's a budget problem, and the child is understood as a small citizen with rights to negotiate over that budget, which means every conversation is inherently adversarial. You are the treasury, they are the petitioner, and every evening is a fresh application for funds. The framing I grew up with doesn't work that way because the underlying question is different. It isn't how much does this child get? It's what is this object for? Tools are defined by their purpose in a Chinese household. That's the whole moral architecture of an object. A knife is for cutting. When you're not cutting, the knife is in the drawer. And this requires no willpower from anyone because it isn't a restriction. It's simply what a knife is. Nobody feels deprived of the knife. Extend that to the screen and the entire emotional temperature of the conversation drops. You are not withholding something your child is entitled to. You are simply not using a tool that has no current job. There's nothing to resent because there's nothing being taken. And I think that's why the negotiations vanish. Not because my son has superior self-control. He is 9, he has the self-control of a golden retriever near a sandwich, but because there's no negotiation available, you cannot bargain for more knife. Now let me be honest about the parts that are harder, because if I ended here, it would be a fairy tale. And this channel doesn't do fairy tales. Does this transplant perfectly into every household? No. If your children are older and the screen war has been entrenched for years, starting this cold will be considerably harder than starting it at 5. Not impossible, but you'll need a family meeting rather than an announcement, and I mean a real one, where you say plainly that the current situation isn't working for anyone including you, and that you're changing your own behavior first. You'll need to survive a worse first week than I had, and you will need to put your own phone in that basket in front of them before you say a single word about theirs. If you do it in the other order, you will lose and you'll deserve to. If your work genuinely requires evening availability, and for many people it does, that's not an excuse, that's a job, then your version might be a 7 o'clock basket or a basket with the announced exception my husband uses. The system bends, it's designed to bend, but it bends out loud by agreement, not through silent private exemptions that quietly teach everyone the rule is theater. And there's a cost to me that I won't pretend away. Some evenings I miss things, messages sit unanswered until morning. Occasionally that's mildly inconvenient. The world, it turns out, continues rotating without my supervision for 12 hours a night, which was its own small and slightly humbling lesson about how necessary I actually am to the operations of the universe. There's also a version of this rule that goes wrong, and I've seen it. If the basket becomes a weapon, if it's enforced with contempt or used as a threat, or if a parent uses it to punish rather than to structure, then you've kept the mechanism and lost the point entirely. The basket is not a cage, it's a shelf. The difference is entirely in the tone of the adult carrying it, and children detect that difference instantly and permanently. What I bought with the cost, though, is this. My son is growing up inside a house where attention is something you give to people, and a screen is something you pick up for a reason and put down when the reason is finished. He will carry that assumption out into a world that profits enormously, genuinely, measurably in billions from him never learning it. That might be the most valuable thing in the basket. It might be the most valuable thing in the house. I want to give you one more piece before we finish, because it's the piece that took me longest to understand, and it's the reason I think this works when so many well-designed systems fail. The basket is not really about screens. The basket is a decision about what a family is. Because here's what I've come to believe standing in my own kitchen at 6 o'clock every evening for years now. A family is not a group of people who live in the same building. A family is a group of people who are regularly, reliably, physically available to each other. That's it. That's the whole definition. And availability is not a feeling, it's a scheduling decision. It's a set of hours you defend. My mother defended those hours with a dinner table and a rule about phones that existed before phones did. My grandmother defended them with a famine-shaped conviction that a family that eats together stays legible to each other. I defend them with a bamboo basket by the front door because that's the tool this century requires. The technology of the threat changes every generation. The defense is always the same. A specific, protected, non-negotiable stretch of time in which the people who love each other are simply in one room, unentertained, available. And the thing nobody tells you is how much of parenting happens in that unentertained space. Not the big conversations, those are rare and mostly overrated. It's the small things that surface only when a child is a little bored and you are a little available. The offhand mention of something a boy said at school that turns out to matter enormously. The question about death that arrives while drying a bowl. The apology that gets made sideways while looking at something else. None of that fits into scheduled quality time. It requires a surplus of ordinary hours spent in proximity doing not very much, which is precisely what screens quietly consume. Not the important hours, but the ordinary ones, and it's in the ordinary ones that children actually get raised. So if you take one thing from my house into yours, don't take the basket. Take the sentence, a screen is a tool with a job. Say it at your own table tonight and watch what shifts. Give the tools a purpose, give them an ending. Give them a home that isn't a bedroom or a pocket. And then, the hard part, the part that makes it real, walk to that home at 6 o'clock and put your own phone in first, where your children can see you do it. You won't have to give a speech. The basket is the speech. And somewhere around the second week on an entirely ordinary evening, you may look up from the dumplings or the homework or the unhurried nothing in particular and notice that the war is simply gone. And in the quiet where it used to live, you'll find your actual family sitting in your actual life available to you. If this video shifted something in the way you see screens and family, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more on how the world's wisest cultures quietly build connection that lasts a lifetime, subscribe. There's a lot more coming. See you in the next one.